So one of my favorite people that I read on Substack is Carolyn Brouillard, who's been on the show a few times. And I think many of us have been following Atlas, the 3iAtlas. What is it? Is it a comet? Is it extraterrestrial? And I am a subscriber on her Substack. And she wrote an article that just really resonated with me. And in fact, it was that article that initiated my desire to do the show. Like, what are these extraordinary signs that are taking place, whether it's astrology, whether it's the Iberian Lynx, whether it's the Bucosphere or the 3i Atlas. And I really like Carolyn's perspective. So welcome back to the Awakening World. And I'm glad you were able to make a little time for us to at least do a pre-record, since your thoughts were the inspiration for the show. So Carolyn, tell us how you see it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Scott. It's always a pleasure to be here. And hi, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be with you live, but happy to share some thoughts. Um, yeah, honestly, I hadn't paid too much attention to 3iAtlas, but some people approached me for my thoughts, and it was a good opportunity for me to kind of check in energetically and see what wanted to come through. And ironically, I think that's one of the big gifts and opportunities and invitations of 3i Atlas and some of these other things that you mentioned. Some of the most interesting questions that I think these things like 3i Atlas raise are the ones that science can't answer or are ill-equipped to answer. Things like 3iAtlas, to me, in my perspective, they exist kind of across multiple dimensions simultaneously. And I mean that in the grander dimensional sense, but just also that there's so many different aspects to this. There's the sort of hard science thing. Is it a comet? How is it behaving? What are its elements and composition? But I'm more interested and fascinated by why it's here and what it represents for us. So, as I discussed in the article, and as you mentioned, I think we are at a critical threshold in our evolutionary journey. And I think 3i Atlas is arriving as a kind of support system, as a kind of late stage infusion of energy to sort of push us over the finish line. As I was tapping in today, what came to me was kind of like a video game. It's like, you're going along, you're playing the game, and you're building skill, you're earning points. And then when you have enough points, there's certain tools or powers that become available to you that equip you for the next levels or the next stage of your journey. And to me, 3i Atlas has that feeling. It's like this delivery of light. Some people have spoken that there's some activations in our DNA, but I think there's also just a really rich psychological process where it's mirroring back to us. It's mysterious enough that we really don't know what it is, so we're left to fill in the gaps. And it's like, okay, like what does this evoke from us? There's this object speeding through our system. We know very little about it. People can ask, am I afraid? What worries do I have? Am I hopeful? What stories am I telling myself? What are we not hearing from the government and people? And what does that reveal about the control structures on our planet? And so, coming back to the earlier point, I think the real sort of opportunity here is to trust yourself and connect with that energy directly, to not rely on intermediaries, but to kind of collapse. It's ironic, but I think this interstellar object way out in space is inviting us to collapse the distance and really see ourselves as these multidimensional energetic beings that are in communication with things like 3i Atlas and maybe even called them in as that kind of support.
That's a beautiful perspective. And we were talking about this just before we recorded that any mystical experience ultimately comes down to what do you choose to believe? What do we choose to believe? We don't have video evidence that there was a Jesus. And so what do you choose to believe? And obviously, a lot of people have chosen to believe he was just a prophet. Many have chosen to believe he was the Messiah. Then what does that actually mean? And then others believe that he never existed. And there is no hardcore proof. It's a matter of what do we believe and why do we choose to believe it? Kind of similar when I work with people that have past life memories or even
Mhm.
dream interpretation. Well, what's your interpretation? And what does your interpretation show you about the way you choose to see the world?
Right. Yeah, I think it's 3iAtlas is largely functioning as a mirror, both individually and for our collective subconscious. And so I think that is um, something to place our attention on. Like I said, what is it evoking from us? And where can we turn what might be a mirror into a window? And so part of what made it significant in my journey is, I've been working on enhancing my own um, channeling, psychic, just intuitive capabilities. And so it was really just sort of an experiment of like, okay, let's see what happens if we sit down on the couch, enter an altered state of consciousness, which I'm fairly practiced at now, and see what comes through. And like you said, I'm not here to tell anyone I have the definitive answers. I also don't have proof. I just have how it felt to me. And to me, it was overwhelmingly supportive, welcoming. It was sort of a homecoming. And it opened up lots of other questions, um, like, where do we find intelligence? Like, what does it suggest about our reality that uh, a flying ball of dust and gas could actually have an intelligence and be interacting with us and guiding and it be its own form of consciousness. And that's really what I was kind of picking up on is um, the sense that it was alive in some way. Um, Not like if you cut it, it'll bleed kind of thing,
Right.
but like, it's a amalgamation, a form of kind of a collective consciousness that is both being guided, but also um, like interacting in the moment, its own sort of creation of that of those who volunteered to be part of that. And so it really opened up these big questions for me too. It's like, well, why couldn't that be the case? As a form of consciousness, when we are creating our physical reality, might some consciousness out there wonder what it's like to be a comet
Mhm.
traveling past a planet of people who are just now waking up? Like that might be pretty cool.
I love that perspective. I love that.
Yeah. And
And,
so we can
and
really like use 3i Atlas to start thinking really outside the box. And that's partly why I wanted to write that article is like, yeah, we can talk about its tail and its non-gravitational acceleration and all of this, or we can just really blow the box wide open and start thinking, asking big questions about consciousness, intelligence, physical reality, and all sorts of things.
I love that. And, you know, because now millions, probably hundreds of millions of people are thinking about it, how are we influencing that that being? Let's just call it a being of some form. I mean, it's influencing us, but like you said, in a sacred mirror, it's two-way. How
Right.
is all of our attention influencing it? Um,
Yeah. Well, what it would make sense to me that it would. Well, I loved somebody commented on my article that he sat down and he's like, I've never done this before, but I'm gonna meditate on this, and had an experience. And we may be able to get some clues or indications depending on what happens when it comes closer to Earth. So it's expected to reach its closest point to Earth, which is still quite far. So anybody who's telling you that you should be worried about it,
Yeah, that's
I
not
would take
happening.
that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Um, but that's around the winter solstice. And to your earlier point as well, I there's so much that's happening now. If you look at the astrology, and I personally believe in the photon belt that we're traveling through, it's like everything is engineered in sorts, not in a predetermined way, but in a we are interacting with our environment and drawing to ourselves the support we need to get over this hump so that we can continue our evolutionary journey.
Absolutely. And yeah, December 19th is the date that
Yeah.
it'll be closest, which happens to be right at the winter solstice.
Yeah.
So that is kind of a cool coincidence.
Right.
Um, well, now you're kind of the alpha and omega of this program because it was your article that inspired the entire show. And I'm going to kind of pretty much start the show by showing this video. But then we're going to conclude the show. We're going to come back to Carolyn, who is going to lead a meditation that will give us all an opportunity to kind of conclude by dropping in and seeing what our experience is going to be. So, but I want to remind everybody that you can find Carolyn the way that I do on her Substack page, and it's called The Galactic Age. Perfect for Carolyn. All about consciousness, reality, and our cosmic kin, rethinking physical reality in this coming age of contact. And she has a lot of really fascinating articles. I actually got pulled into reading her perspective about a very thorough about the Malaysian Airlines disappearance. Boy, that was a thorough article.
I
I got
really went down the rabbit hole on that one.
you sure did. Yeah, that's a small book. But there's a lot of really fascinating things. Of course, there you can see some of the articles that she's written. Um, and when you change and others don't, that was another really good one. As a love coach, I could relate to that. So I want to encourage everybody to do what I've done. Subscribe to Carolyn's Substack, and it's The Galactic Age. And we'll be back with Carolyn at the end of the show.
Thanks, Scott.